translated into Russian with a perfect accent, you know, and it was just an amazing wedding. She's an amazing person, as is her sister and her mother and her aunt. Um, so I want to thank the rabbi for inviting me to be here and for all of you being here tonight. It's late, and I'm just really thrilled to tell you my father's life story is very inspiring, even though it's about the Holocaust, but it does go on into his life in later years. He is very sick. He has advanced dementia, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, and now he's bedridden. So I tell him, he knows about the book. You know, it came out early enough so he was able to get review copy and know about it. And I talked to him about the fact that I'm speaking about it, and he understands, and he still knows who I am and my sister and his caregivers. Probably the rabbi too. Can't forget the rabbi. So life must go on. The remarkable story of Sol Lurie, the Kovna ghetto, and the tragic fate of Lithuania's Jews is different than a lot of Holocaust memoirs. It describes my father's efforts to survive, but it also goes into the history of Lithuania and the Kovna ghetto, and the camps, the towns and cities where the camps were located, where he was incarcerated. That's different. So most survivors' books and most children of survivors' books just focus on the survivor's experience. But this gives you the historical context, which my co-author, who's an historian and a noted Holocaust scholar and genocide expert, said was missing from the memoirs. So this gives you a whole different perspective. And without learning about that history, especially for Lithuania, you don't really understand how it was possible for more than 95% of Lithuanian Jews to be murdered. And it was because of the history of anti-Semitism by Lithuanians that they helped the Nazis before they arrived. So they were part of the murdering of Jews, I mean, even before the Nazis invaded. Jews have lived in Lithuania for as early as the 8th century, and there were periods where anti-Semitism was absolutely brutal and horrific, but there were also peaceful times where the Jews did well. There were times when they were kicked out of the country, and there were times when they were in leadership in government positions. By the time of World War II, anti-Semitism had reared its ugly head, and things became just awful for the Jews. So my father, who's now 95, had a very wonderful childhood. He enjoyed ice skating, horseback riding, skiing, and sledding. He loved spending time with his 3 brothers. He was the youngest, and his parents, and his grandfather, Label, who he absolutely adored and followed him around wherever he could. He lived with his grandfather and his parents and his brothers. And one of the things that he found really special about his life with his grandfather was walking to shul every Friday night and every Shabbos. My father's family had a very comfortable life. His father was a partner with his father and his siblings in a lumber business that had 80 horses, 70 staff, and a lumber mill. And the family had, a nanny, Anja, and Naja, whom my father absolutely loved. My father and his family were aware of the rise of Hitler. I mean, starting when my father was 6, they were listening to the shortwave radio. They knew what was going on, but they never thought, like a lot of Jews, that it would come to their doorstep. So now I just want everybody to take a pause with me and close your eyes. Just close your eyes and imagine what it was like when you were 11 years old. What were you doing? What was your life like? Who were your friends? What kinds of things made you happy? My father, when he was 11, had this great life, which I've told you about. His life was carefree. It was fun. Now open your eyes and imagine what it would be like if in an instant your entire world changed and your life became a living hell. It was at that tender age of 11 when the Nazis broke their non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union and invaded Lithuania. My father's family knew that their lives were in danger, so they packed up a wagon with 2 of their horses. They put as much stuff as they could onto it quickly, and they and some of their relatives took off running and walking, trying to get as deep into the Soviet Union as they could. And along the road, when they were running and walking, there was Nazis strafing the road where all these Jews were trying to escape with machine gun fire and with bombs. And every time they heard a plane come close, they would jump into a ditch. And, luckily they were all okay, but other people who were on that same road ended up being killed or injured. They ended up walking 20 miles and they got to this town, a small town where there was a synagogue, and they decided to stop for the night. They found a place to sleep, and then they learned that the Lithuanians had already started lining up Jews and murdering them. My father's family woke up the next morning and the Nazis had then invaded. And they told all the Jews, they didn't tell them, they ordered them to go into the synagogue, and they locked the doors, and they were in there for 3 days, not having any idea what was going to happen to them. After the 3 days, the Nazis opened the synagogue, and they told all of the Jews who weren't from this particular town to go back to where they came from. But they kept the Jews from that town, the 300 Jews, in the synagogue and locked it. And as my father and his family were leaving, they saw that the Lithuanians had set the synagogue on fire with those 300 Jews inside. That was the beginning of multiple horrors that they saw. So when they went to go look for their horses, the horses had been stolen. And so my grandfather and one of my uncles, took the wagon as if they were the horses, and they started going down this road, going back to Kovna. And they were stopped by a Nazi soldier who said to them, "Where are your horses?" And they explained that the Nazis had ordered them to go back to Kovna, where they're from. And then he said to them, the story always upsets me. He said to them that he asked them where they were going. That's what I meant to say. And he told them where. And then he said to them, "Where are your horses?" And he said to them, "Our horses were stolen." And the Nazi soldier said, "You wait right here, and I will be back." And so they waited and waited for 15 to 20 minutes. And this Nazi soldier came back with 2 horses. And he said to them, you take these horses and don't go on the road that you are going on, because that's the road the Lithuanians are on, and they are robbing the Jews of their possessions, and they are also killing them afterwards. Go on this road where the Nazis are, and you'll be fine. And, they had like a split few minutes to make a very quick decision, like, where did they go? And they went down the road where the Nazis were, and they were fine and came back to Kovna. When they came to Kovna, they went back, they had 2 houses, one which was a rental, where they had lived previously, and one that the family owned that actually had running water. And so they went back to their house, the first house, and there were Lithuanians had taken over their house already. They went to the second house and the same thing had happened. So they decided that they would go into the stables and they would live there because they know the place to go. So in a few weeks, all the Jews were ordered by the Nazis to move into the newly created ghetto. The ghetto was sealed with barbed wires and guards. There was absolutely no way to escape. It was then that my father decided he was going to outlive Hitler. And that's what kept him motivated for the 4 years of hell that he was in. That sheer determination and hope motivated him every minute of every day. But it wasn't hope alone that led to his miraculous survival. There was also luck, for sure. But my dad believed that his grandfather Label, who died the day before the Nazis invaded, was watching over him and guiding him and helping him. And then there were also the kindness of some Germans who kept him alive, as well as prisoners of war who shared some of their meager food allowances with the kids. The Covenant Ghetto was in the poorest part of the city where my dad's aunt and uncle lived. They had no other place to go, so the aunt and uncle took one floor. My dad and his family took another floor, and another set of relatives took another floor, and they were squeezed into this very, very small house. Life was really brutal in the ghetto. The Nazis regularly rounded up children, the disabled, the infirm, and women. They had no use for children. Well, my father's brothers and parents were slave laborers during the day. My father had to evade the Nazis and try to survive. And he described it like being a rat. I mean, he would hide inside walls, he would hide inside the ground, he would hide wherever he could to survive for another minute, another day, another year. He witnessed the size of the ghetto shrinking, and people being taken away and murdered and having to build their own, to dig their own graves. He lived in constant terror, but was always thinking of ways that he could survive. One day, my dad and his brothers, who one of their jobs was to work in the stables, had heard that the Nazis were planning to do another roundup of children. So they grabbed my father and my cousin and her 7-month-old baby, and they put them in a hole that was inside the stables where they would put the refrigeration, be refrigeration there during the cold weather. So they put them in there, they put on a board, plywood board, or whatever kind of board it was, a wooden board, and then they put some hay and they put some wheat, and they left a little space for them to be able to breathe. My cousin had asthma, so she was having a very hard time. So unfortunately, just as she started moving the board just a little bit to be able to breathe more, the wheat and the hay started seeping in, and the Nazis had come in, and one Nazi soldier saw the wheat and hay seeping in and ran over and lifted the board and said, "Juden raus, Jews get out." And so the baby started screaming, and the Nazi grabbed my 7-month-old cousin and put him on the tip of his bayonet.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and started spinning him around.
Oh, yeah.
And my father decided that if he was going to survive, he had to run. So he leaped out of this hole. He went running to the back of the stables, and he hid inside a bin, a compartment inside a hay bin, and was there. And the Nazis were taking their bayonet looking for him. So they were sticking it into the hay and the wheat, trying to find him. And my father's older brother, Menda, saw what was going on, and he yelled at my father in Yiddish to get out and run. So my father, took off and starts running towards the back of the stables, because that's where the door was to get out of the stables, and the Nazis are shooting at him. And by some miracle, they don't hit him. He runs out of the gate, he leaps over a fence, and then he goes into the outhouse, and he submerges himself partially inside the waist, so that when the Nazis, when he heard them coming, he submerged himself fully and then went inside the waist, and they didn't see him, and he survived again. There were a lot of close calls with my father. It's pretty amazing. So he stayed there. He stayed submerged partially in the waist all day until it was really dark outside. And he figured out that that might be the safest time for him to try to go back home. Meanwhile, the brothers, had seen what happened, and they figured that he must have been captured and killed because they hadn't heard from him. And so they had told my grandmother, who I'm named after, that he must have been killed. And she adored my father. He was her youngest, last child she was going to have. And she was just, her eyes were just completely red from crying. And in comes my father, filled with, this human waste. And she sees him, and she runs over and hugs and kisses him because she loved him that much. And when my father goes and talks to school kids, or when he talked to school kids, he would tell them about, this is what a parent's love means. And you have to really love your parents because of what they'll sacrifice for you. So after a while, the Kovna Ghetto became one of the few camps that became a concentration camp, and life got even worse than it was. He survived that, and the camp was liquidated as the Allies started getting closer, and they put him and his surviving family, which there weren't many of them left, in an open cattle guard to Stutthof in Germany. When they got there, the Nazis ordered that the women and children would be on one side and that the men would be on another side. So my father was a kid, and my grandfather realized that if he stayed with the women and children, he wouldn't survive. So when the Nazis weren't looking, he grabbed my father and hid him among the men. After Stutthof, they were all sent to Landsberg and Kaufering, which is part of Dachau. And one day, while his father and brothers were slave laborers at an underground factories, the Nazis rounded up these boys from Kovna. There were 31 of them, and they shipped them in a boxcar to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the kids knew what was going on there. They knew about the extermination camps at Birkenau, and they knew that they had just about no chance of surviving. 2 of the boys broke through the floorboards in the boxcar and escaped. My dad has no idea what happened to him, and other survivors who he knew didn't know either. So when they arrived at Birkenau, the Nazis ordered the boys to undress, and they gave them a towel and a bar of soap, because the Nazis loved to play on the psyche of the prisoners. And they told the boys they were going to take a shower. The kids knew that this was obviously not true. When they got into the gas chambers and the door was locked, a miracle happened, and water came out. And my father didn't know for decades what happened until he read the Auschwitz Chronicles, which is 2 books that is the Nazis' records day by day, minute by minute, what happened in the camps. And he found out that at midnight that day, they arrived about 3 o'clock in the morning. At about midnight that day, an agreement started with the Americans that if they would stop gassing for 48 hours, they would stop gassing for 48 hours, and the Nazis would get 10,000 trucks, sugar, and flour. So they just happened to be there at that point. But the Americans didn't keep their commitment, and they started gassing after that. So my father was next sent to Buna, which is an Auschwitz-Birkenau subcamp, where he got extra nourishment by stealing potatoes and other things from the fields. And he became a supervisor. He was promoted. And he was told that his job was to make sure that none of the kids took anything from the fields. Well, my father not only took stuff, but he told the kids to take stuff too. And, one day the commandant showed up and found out what my father was doing. And he pulled out his pistol, put it to my father's head, and said, "I'm going to kill you." My father was like, "Here, my life is over." And then the commandant laughed and said, "I like you, so I'm not going to do that, but don't do this again." So, of course, my father did it again because it was all about survival and the survival of the other kids. It wasn't just about him. So my father had many horrific experiences in Auschwitz-Birkenau, but he survived only to be sent on the death march. And it was in the bitter cold of winter in Poland. They only had their little striped pajamas, as he called them, and clogs, and that was it. And it was snowing, and there was snow on the ground. And they survived by taking a risk. Not everybody was lucky. Some kids got caught, some people got caught, but they would like bend down and get snow and use that as hydration. But they eventually made it to a train station after days of marching, and they put them on a boxcar, an open boxcar, and they were sent to Buchenwald. So that was camp number 6 that he was sent to. He survived all of these camps over those 4 very long years from the age of 11 to 15. He was liberated from Buchenwald on his birthday on April 11th, 1945. And despite the brutality that he experienced and witnessed, and the heinous murders of family members and other Jews, my father never gave up hope and fought with every ounce of his being to beat the Nazis. By the end of the Holocaust, only 12 members of our more than 100 relatives survived. My father was sent then to a Jewish orphanage, the Ozay, in Normandy. The staff had a very difficult time controlling the kids because they were treated as subhumans, and suddenly they had freedom. So they asked psychiatrists to come and examine these kids. And after a lot of interviews, a lot of kids, they had a pronouncement. They pronounced that all of the kids are so damaged that all you can do was throw away the key and institutionalize them. And luckily, the Ozay didn't choose to do that because these survivors have contributed so much to our lives and to society. My dad didn't learn until a year after his father and brothers survived, and they were stuck in the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain. And it was extremely rare, according to the Holocaust Museum, for that many members of one family to survive. His father wanted him to come home to Kovna, and my father, at the age of 16, said no. He didn't want to live a life of repression, of propaganda, of surveillance. He decided that he was going to move to America with an aunt and uncle who he had never met. So my dad settled in America. He learned English, he earned a living, and he eventually fell in love with my mother, Evelyn Rebecca Lurie of blessed memory. And they were married for 36 years. Both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. It was a very difficult childhood, as it was for other children of survivors. Growing up, my parents did not talk about their experiences in the Holocaust. My father had horrific nightmares. I mean, he would wake up screaming, like blood-curdling screams in the middle of the night. And I would go into my parents' room and say, "Mom, what's wrong with Dad?" And she'd go back to sleep, everything's okay. But when I was 11, my parents couldn't afford to send me to camp. So my mom, who was so controlling because she was trying to protect us, from, the world being a dangerous place, which is what we learned, she sent me to walk to the library by myself. I walk 7 blocks, cross, big intersection, and they get to the library. And I would just go on the bookshelves and like take out books and read them and take books out. One day I found the books on the Holocaust. Wasn't looking for them. I just found them. And my stomach just dropped and I couldn't look at them. So I walked away. The next day I decided that I would take a book off the shelf, sit down and start reading it. And it was incredibly difficult because I didn't know what things I were reading happened to my dad. I didn't know, I didn't have an understanding of it because nobody talked about it. Um, and I had no one to talk to, about it. So it was a very difficult experience, but I kept on taking up books. I couldn't bring them home. That would never happen. You could not bring a book about the Holocaust into our house. So I just, in the library, that's how I got my education. Um, it wasn't, no. So although the trauma of the Holocaust imbued every aspect of my life, growing up, I learned about hope and giving back from my family. The values of my upbringing led to my careers. You spoke in public service, businesses empowering others, volunteering, and being kind to strangers, just like my dad. I learned to care deeply about what was going on in the world, the reading of the New York Times, and I listened to the fevered political conversations and arguments between my mother and her brother, my Uncle Harry, who walked 1.5 miles every Shabbos to be able to visit my mother and to visit us. I learned about John F. Kennedy, who gave the nation hope, and the dirty tricks of Richard Nixon when he was running for office. So it wasn't until I was 44 years old that I learned about my dad's experiences. He finally talked to me, and it was life-changing. I began for the first time to understand my dad, his lack of emotion towards his kids, the hoarding of foods, his fear of getting lost, the avoidance of risk. I used to be so angry at my parents because of how they parented, but with this window into my father's and my mother's life, I began to understand them, and my dad became my hero. While my mother was ill with cancer, my father told me that he needed to start speaking about what happened to him during the Holocaust, which almost made me plots. I encouraged him and nudged him for 11 years, and he just couldn't do it. I mean, who wants to reach down that deep into your soul and pull up memories that you really buried? But his stepdaughter, and Carol and Steve are actually on the Zoom call, Samantha, started in February, and she was relentless. And finally, by May, he had agreed to come to Samantha's school. They were learning about the Holocaust. And he was one of 3 or 4 Holocaust survivors, and each of them told their story. And then my father talked a little bit. But in a few days, he started getting letters from the kids about the impact he had on them, and that was it. He just decided that if it was that important for the kids to hear what he had to say, then he would do it. And it gave him a whole new lease on life. He told me that once he started talking to kids and other audiences, that he realized that this is the reason that God saved his life, to be a witness. So he got, over time, he taught kids about, and adults, about never giving up, about a mother's love, about pushing back against bullies, and how important kindness is. And he mesmerized kids. I mean, I didn't believe that my shy father could be a great public speaker. I went to hear him. he mesmerized the kids, and you can hear a pin drop. There'd be hundreds of kids, in an auditorium or in the gym, and my father speaking, and nobody said a word. So he really had a huge impact, and we have over 10,000 letters in the house from all these kids and adults about the impact he had on their lives. Despite all the inhumanity and evil of the Nazis, my father never hated all the Germans because of those Germans that risked their lives to save his. He said, I would be just like them if I hated all the Germans. He never forgot what it felt like to be without the most basic necessities or the impact of hate. My father never passed a homeless person without giving them food or money because he knew what it was like to be starving. In his home repair business, if he was in a house and he felt that the people couldn't afford to pay, he wouldn't ask them for money because he said that he didn't want to take money off the table of somebody who didn't have money. He never passed an opportunity to be pleasant to people, just telling total strangers, you have a beautiful smile, or your hair looks great. I mean, he just was, he changed a lot over the years, and I've learned from him. So I talk to strangers too. And he stood up to bullies of all kinds because he stood up to Hitler, who he said was the world's worst bully. So when my dad asked me to write his biography, I couldn't say no. I didn't want to dig deep into my soul to share, to start bringing up the experiences that I had done a really good job of burying, but I knew that I had to write his story. And I started writing it, and I got to chapter 3, and I started writing the story I told you about my 7-month-old cousin, and I couldn't type any more of those words. It was like, I just can't do this. This is just unbelievable that anybody can be this inhumane. And my father kept on asking me, where's the book? Where's the book? And I'm like, I'm working on it, but I really wasn't working on it. And then through a fortunate series of events, I was introduced to Dr. Stephen Leonard Jacobs, who's a Holocaust historian and genocide expert, and just an amazing man who decided that he would write the book. And I figured I was scot-free. A year later, he calls me up and he says, I've written all the history, I've done all the research, you have to write your father's story. And I was like, oh no, why is that? And he said, because I just don't know enough. So over the next 5 years, with a lot of procrastination, a lot of avoidance, I wrote his story. And then the first publisher I approached said yes. So I wrote my father's story because it's a story that must be told, especially as memories of the Holocaust are fading and deniers are growing. It must be told because anti-Semitism in the US and the world has been growing exponentially. And it must be told because we can never let the Holocaust happen again. When I was visiting concentration camps with my father, I saw that many of the camps were not in isolated locations. And I kept on thinking about this unattributable quote, that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. All of this could not have happened if all the good people, and there were a lot more good people than evil people, even now, had done something. So we mustn't let history repeat itself, especially when the facts are being forgotten, distorted, or reinvented. We need to do a better job of ensuring this history is not forgotten. And my upbringing taught me about the power of the people to affect change through activism and voting. That's why with the growth of anti-Semitism, I still have hope. I know that staying silent, hoping for the best, will only escalate hatred, that bullies fear strength, and that there are more good people than evil people. This is the time for Jews and people of all religions to band together against hatred, cruelty, violence, and evil. We can and we must make a difference what will you do? I have two asks: not on Shabbos, buy the book and learn his story and tell my dad's story to others. And I am available to speak in other venues. So if you place you want me to speak, or you've got friends who are of the other faiths and want to hear me speak, I do that as well. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Rabbi, for being here today and listening to my dad's story. He's a very special man.
So we're going to take some questions, if that's okay. First, I'm going to ask two questions. First is, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in New Jersey?
Brooklyn.
Oh, in Brooklyn.
Yay!
And will you tell a little bit about your father's favorite song? Because I know what it is.
Oh, my father loves Hava Nagila. And so it's actually pretty amazing. I mean, he will just perk up when you sing Hava Nagila with him. He loves God Bless America too. But they have this woman from hospice who plays music, and she comes once a week. She's not Jewish, but she's dating a Jewish guy, and she has learned all these different Yiddish songs that I grew up with. And so she plays them, and it's just so amazing. But he's just not responding as much as he had been. You know, he just is going into his own world. But he still occasionally tells me he loves me, which is very wonderful.
Are there other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for your story. Your father's reaction, you didn't talk about your mother at all.
No, that's a whole other story.
I have no doubt she's played a story. Both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. You know, I don't know their stories. His reaction about not being willing to talk about it is super classic.
Mm-hmm.
I have a cousin, you know, we share, you know, this, you know, my mother and her father. He didn't talk about it either. Holocaust survivors did not want to talk about it. And all my parents' friends were Holocaust survivors. They did not want to talk about it either.
And
It was
liberators,
extremely classic.
liberators won't talk about it. His liberator moved in 6 doors down from his house. And when my father, it's a longer story, but when my father and his wife went over to go greet him, he said to my father, he goes, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from New Jersey, originally from Brooklyn, you know." And the guy goes, "No, you have an accent." And my father said, "I never had an accent until I came to America." So when the guy said, "No, where were you from?" And he told him, and then it turns out that he was in the first tank. My father was looking through the slats, and he saw the first tank coming in, and he was in the first tank, and he never talked about it. My father, the guy started crying, buzzing like a baby, and my father took him with him to talk, and he just cried the entire time and wouldn't say a word, and he died without telling his story. Like this, yeah. It's hard.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to tell you about my Washington.
Oh.
My father was a cigar. His name was Sol Lurie.
Oh, who is your father?
Sol Lurie, Lida. He passed away about 10 years ago. I've seen your father and my father, because my father lived in my father. And they were at camps together, but I don't know which camp. And the father tried to encourage my father to speak, but my father was shy. I think he went with him once, but he didn't talk too much. But he has spoken to me. I know stories. Local interview boys,
Yes, yeah.
and I have this tape. And I watched it, and I didn't sleep for a week.
Oh my God.
After seeing the tape, or hearing the tape, seeing it also.
No, we have to. We have to keep telling this history.
You need to get up. Go ahead.
So I want to ask a couple of questions about Lithuania. First of all, Lithuania is one of the 3 small countries east of Russia. And
Was on the
as
floor.
far as I know, it has the largest population of Jews in the biggest Jewish center. For the other two countries afflicted by the same things that happened to Lithuania, that's Holocaust. And second question, have you ever gone to Lithuania?
So Poland, on my understanding, had the largest number of Jews at 3 million Jews. I don't know anything about the other countries. I mean, I know that the three Baltic states, but I don't know what happened in World War II. I doubt they, that they escaped having the Nazis take the Jews away.
Lithuania was the big Jewish center. at that
Yeah,
time.
oh yeah, very famous.
Is there any form of recurrence of anti-Semitism there now
Yeah.
among Lithuanians?
Yeah, they're in the process, the government's in the process of rewriting the history so that they did not victimize Jews. They're like, they're putting up statues honoring some of the aggressors. I mean, it's terrible. And I still have not been able to get reparations for all my father's family's property, which was extensive. Now, I'd never been with him to Lithuania. We talked about it. My father's uncle, Shlomo, who eventually left Kovna and came to Israel, he went multiple times. And my cousin, his daughter, she also went. I did go with my father to Buchenwald. And I also went on the March of the Living. The Holocaust Museum took survivors and children of survivors. That was in 2005, and we went to concentration camps in Poland. And the worst was Majdanek, because it was left like it would have been. So you can see the towers, the barbed wire. I mean, it was horrifying. And the thing that was really upsetting to me, as if that wasn't enough, the whole thing was upsetting, was that they were in the entryway into where the where the ovens were. We were told that they could be reactivated in 15 minutes. But in the entryway, there were holes in the concrete walls, all over. And I'm thinking, my God, how can they desecrate this holy space? And it turns out that those holes were done in the early 1950s by deniers who were examining and testing for gas to see if there was xylem B gas. Well, gas is inert, so of course it wasn't there. And they used that as proof that the Holocaust didn't happen. So even as far back as then, they were trying to pretend it didn't happen. Of course, the Nazis kept great records, so it's hard to deny it.
This is an aside. I always think of what happened back in 2006 when my husband and I were on a tour. And we took a tour from Munich up to Temple. And it was just organized through the town center. There were 7 or 8 of us. We took a train out and then a bus. And there was a young German guy, 29, 30 years old, and he's the one who took us. And I'll never forget when we were at the train station waiting for the train to start the trip out there. And he was talking to us, what we would find, what we would see, what to expect. And this old Jewish person came up to him and started screaming at him in German. In German, you could see this person was really mad at our guy. Finally, he chased her away, and he said to us that she was mad because he was talking about the Holocaust, and he shouldn't talk about it, and he shouldn't mention it, and they just wanted to act like it never happened. And that was the attitude of the older German.
I just read something this week, very upsetting. I just read something this week, very upsetting, in the Times about a particular man who is becoming very powerful in the Republican Party. His name is Nick Fuentes.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I'm very upset. because he's somebody who is pro Hitler and doesn't believe the Holocaust happened. And aside from all the things he feels about women in general and all, he's going to be a very Hitler-like person who's going to become more influential, I'm afraid, in a very short period of time in this country.
He is already. I mean, he was, Trump invited him. This is the first administration. Invited him over for dinner at Mar-a-Lago. And that was, Mar-a-Lago. And that was, there's a lot of really dangerous people that are out there. Very dangerous. I mean, we have to like just be out there talking and telling, the stories and fighting back. I mean, we can't stay silent.
What do we do then?
In response to what Ira asked about surrounding countries, my family was from Riga. As a matter of fact, my grandfather was a Lurie. And the
Lurie, you said?
Lurie, yeah,
We need to talk.
yeah, we'll talk later.
Okay.
But and we found on the tour that we were on, we found a guide that took us to the old part of Riga. And I had heard of it, but my grandfather's family lived in these wooden huts or whatever. And they're also in that part of Riga is they've done a lot of stuff that you can see. I mean, they've rebuilt the part of the ghetto. They've rebuilt some of the shacks that they lived in those days, the little wooden houses and things like that. And they had built a magnificent synagogue in Riga. And it was built the year my grandfather was born in 1875. But all you see there of that synagogue is that synagogue, people were in it and they were burned. You see just the outline. And the synagogue was burned with people inside of it. And it was burned on June 11th, 1941, which is the day that I was born.
Oh, there's new life when there's death. So in answer, you asked the question, what can we do? So do you work with Jubelong at all? Do you know who they are?
I've heard of them.
Yeah. So Jubelong is this really cool organization. They're very, in your face about anti-Semitism. In my Jewish Federation in Chattanooga had a partnership with them and still does. And they put out these signs, these like billboards. I don't know if you've seen them. They're like, right, they're hot pink. And then they have messages about anti-Semitism that, just like, get you to think. And I have one of their signs in my front yard. And I recently spoke at a church. And one of the congregants asked me a great question. He said, "Why is anti-Semitism increasing, and what can we do to help?" And I was like, I just want to go over and hug and kiss the guy. And I said, well, one thing maybe we can do is you can be our allies, and you all can work with the Jewish Federation and get some of these signs and put them in your yards. Because if we have other people, not just Jews, having these signs in their yards, but other people in communities, not just in Chattanooga, but also around the country, and we have all these allies, that's a way to kind of tell people that this is something that you can't, there are too many people who are opposed to what you're doing, and here are all the people who support us. And the reason that spoke to me as an idea was because I don't remember where it was, but there was a anti-Semitic incident someplace in the Midwest a while ago, and all of the people in that town put menorahs
I think it was actually in Montana.
in Montana.
Yeah,
Okay,
I remember that. I think it was Whitefish, Montana.
that's right.
Yeah. I remember, I read about that. Yeah, the entire town put menorahs around Hanukkah. The entire town put menorahs. Everyone put them on their lawn.
And, most of the town wasn't Jewish. I mean, so non-Jews can really support us, and we need those allies. That's just one thing we can
And
do.
what was that called?
It's called Jew, belong. Yeah.
That's my cousin. Gottesman?
Yeah.
Yep.
Archie
Archie Gottesman.
Is it? Yeah.
My cousin.
Really? Well, there you go. You have a
Small world.
connection. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Bea, I want to thank you so very much for being with us this evening and sharing. All right, friends, before we leave, I wanted to share a couple things. The first is that, you're all welcome to take home those postcards, which give you information on the book. Also, we have books here. If you would like to take a book, and you just let me know, and we can take care of the other part later because it's Shabbat. But if you want to take a book, I'll just write your name down, okay? In addition, I want to let everyone know, we're just so grateful to Bea Lurie for being with us this evening and speaking. Thank you very much. We on Friday, December 5th, we're having another speaker. Same format, 7 p.m. Shabbat service, 8 p.m. Oneg and guest speaker. Our guest speaker on Friday, December 5th will be Aaron Hurt Mannheimer. Did anybody remember reading Reform Judaism